I always used to get into trouble when I would ask people about why I had to take their perspectives. In fact, it seemed like I kept offending everyone to the point that I felt very self-conscious about speaking my mind or my views or voicing my opinion. And for a long time, while I felt very vocal, I started withdrawing more and more to myself. That was until I learned the art of debating. I had met my mentor at a conference by accident, and he inspired me to look at things differently. His tips and techniques have helped me so much along the way that it brought back this sense of life again, that I'm allowed to have this opinion. But it's the way you frame it that makes all the difference. So I've invited my mentor, Paul Carroll, to come and speak and share his techniques and insights with all of you. And especially in the world that we're finding ourselves in, and we're competing with AI, we're competing on virtually, we're competing with social media. I mean, in the sense, competing in that getting our opinions to be heard in the space of a lot of noise, you want to bring quality to the conversation. Enjoy this week's episode, and I look forward to hearing about what your thoughts are after the episode.
It does take an art to speak the uncomfortable, or actually you're having your point of view in today's world is uncomfortable. So what brought you into why we debating? Because you've founded a club here, but why did you feel it was necessary, and what got you into debating?
What got me into debating was school, years and years, decades ago. I shudder to think, but it was many decades ago, and in fact, it's funny you should bring that up, because I was thinking about it the other day when our recently re-inaugurated president decided he wanted to take back the Panama Canal. And when I was in high school, the Panama Canal Zone and the canal were still total property of the United States. And I was a freshman in high school, and my teacher said to me, "Why should we give back the Panama Canal to Panama?"
Oh, okay.
And I said, "I don't think we should." And my teacher said, "That is not what I asked."
That is not what you asked.
That's what he said.
Okay.
He said, "Give me one reason why we should." And I said, "Well, it's in Panama." He said, "Fine." Then he called on another boy and said, "Why should we not give the Panama Canal to Panama?" And he said, "Well, it's, we built it. It's ours." He said, "Okay, fine." And he sent us both to the library for 10 minutes. He said, "Look up whatever you have to look up and prepare a 5-minute statement and come back." And we did. That was my first ever debate in high school. And it certainly got me interested in public speaking, presenting, debating.
Well, what was it in that moment that really got you thinking to go further with it? There must have been one thing specifically, more than public speaking.
Well, it's it's probably it's not a very noble reason, but I actually enjoyed being in front of the class and giving my views. We should give it back for this reason. And actually, it didn't change my mind. I did not agree with the point I was making, but the point of doing debate is I understood the other side of my view better than I had. I hadn't even thought about it. I was 14. I really didn't think much about.
Did you think about the other view?
Policies towards the Panama Canal. No, what I thought about, my instant response when he said, "Why should we give it back?" was, we shouldn't. So I was on the other side, and I remained on that side, but I thought more about what it would be like to be on the side I didn't agree with. And that I have found is helpful. It's just a helpful way of thinking.
Has it helped you in your career as well, or relationships?
It helped. It helped in my career. It helped in my career, for instance, to be able to plausibly ask myself, well, what does the other side of this potential transaction want?
How has that shaped you by taking the other side? Has there ever been moments where it really got you thinking about yourself?
I wouldn't say that. I'll be honest. I don't dive into my own psyche too much.
Yeah.
It's certainly no more than I have to. But it gave me other ways to think, other ways to see things, and that's been helpful.
So why is it now? I mean, I go back to that moment where I had to stand there in that moment and then talk. I remember feeling very self-conscious of my culture, to be honest. I felt very self-conscious of being a woman of color, and then having an opinion about politics or having an opinion of economy. And I had like my parents' voices in the back of my head, like, be careful what you say. So, you know, if you've survived or you've gone through, your ancestors have gone through colonialism, you are raised with this idea of be careful what you say when you say it. Someone like me got a lot out of debating. What would you suggest is, if you're not in a debating club or you don't want to go to a debating club, how could people in their youth or even later on support themselves to get to that point where they can? And why should they speak in this kind of world?
That opens a lot of avenues.
Tell me.
But why I think it's a good idea? I think it's a good idea if for no other reason it just helps you think on more sides than the one you naturally fall on. Even if you never practice debate, even in a debating club, it does help you internally to think about, well, what's the other side? Or is there another side? Or, you know, is there any source of information I can go looking for now that will present me another side? Am I hearing all sides of whatever the event is that I happen to be examining or listening to on the news or reading about in the papers? Is there more to this than that? I think it helps in that regard. As far as cross-culture, in my experience, it has. You brought up the issue of being under colonial domination, and I never was. Yeah. I never lived under domination of a foreign power. My father did, which is why he and his family went to America in the first place. But what he did learn, and it sounds paradoxical, I know, belonging to a very hierarchical church like the Catholic Church, but in Catholic schooling, particular under the direction of the Jesuit order, one of the things you learn is debate, and that's what he learned in high school, and it's one thing I learned in high school. And there are many reasons why that is seen, even in a hierarchical organization, it is seen as a good thing to be teaching.
Okay, I've got quite a few questions there. Jesuits debate?
Absolutely.
Wow, I had no idea. How is it different to the way they debate now, or is it similar as to how we debate nowadays?
Well, I mean, a lot of the rules I learned of debating was the rules I learned in school, and it's I could send you something. If anyone wants to look this up, you can Google the phrase ratio studiorum.
All right, English, Paul.
Well, that's the title of the book, is
okay.
Ratio Studiorum, and it's the lineup of studies, and including how to conduct classroom debates. And because the mission to teach students how to take on leadership roles in society, for instance, involves among other things, learning to debate, learning to.
But why did they see it
views.
so? Why did they feel that was super important, other than leadership? I mean, that's pretty high up there.
They're a teaching order. They teach.
Okay. And how does it ever? So there's, with that also comes the moral compass. I mean, one thing I learned in debating was, is your view really right or is your view really wrong? And it made me question the moral compass, you know, and even in cultures, because certain cultures, the compass is very differently. And so having a debate is very, for me, I found it very curious. So in Jesuits also, they must have had the moral compass. And how did that fuse in with their debating structure?
Well, one of the things about debate, which you know certainly goes back to the Roman Senate, so predating any of that, is the idea that you will represent your side better if you know the other side.
You will present your side better if you know the other side. Okay.
And the thing about classroom debate is this is not like a debate in Parliament or in the United States Senate. We don't pass any laws. Nothing that we decide in our debating societies is binding. But part of enthusiastically participating in debate is, for the space of an hour or 2 hours, you pretend that it does. And say, what is the best I can say for or against this particular issue? One of the things that does, and it can take a while, but it will certainly do it if you keep at debating. One of the things is you will see a lot less black and white in the world, and you will see a lot more gray. Some people don't like that idea. They would prefer to divide the world into right and wrong absolutes, but most of the world really isn't. And you have to decide for yourself in a given time and place what you think is right. Now, what you think is right will depend on a million things, many of them cultural, and how you were brought up to think. And there is nothing wrong with that. But how you justify it to yourself, how you can stay within whatever your cultural, ethical norm is, how you can stay within that and still approach a real world problem. It's, well, as I say, it bothers some people. Other people find it addictive.
Have you ever found yourself in a cross-cultural moment where you needed to debate or needed to argue, or?
Where I needed to or had to? No, I really haven't. But I've never gotten much involved in politics. I'm not a lawyer, so I've never represented a side in court where you have to sometimes swallow some of your ethics, or maybe not some of your ethics, but certainly some of the nuances of your opinion in order to represent someone. Sometimes you do have to I don't want to say swallow your morality, but override it with a different kind of morality. For instance, if you are the lawyer who is put in charge of the defense of someone, and just picking up the papers, you can find a half a dozen or so very easily. But if you are assigned the lawyer to defend someone who is accused of a particularly heinous crime, you might think, my God, how can you defend that? And the answer is, you're not. But
well, when you say you're not,
well, you're not defending murder or rape. Let's say you're not defending that. What you are defending is someone who is accused of that horrendous crime, and someone who is not equipped to defend himself or herself in court, which follows all kinds of rules, like a debating society, and has all kinds of rules about presentation, which this person who is accused of a terrible crime is not capable of doing, maybe not even understanding. So, as an advocate, they say, you defend this person, and to the best of your ability, you defend that person. Now, one of the things you might do is arrange for someone to be to take his legal punishment in the best possible way, because having read the facts of the case, you are personally, as a defense lawyer, you're personally convinced of, oh my God, this guy's guilty. But what your job to do is to just make the case. Now,
but there's that thing. So I remember this one word. I love it still today. I use it. Ad hominem. Don't take it personal. I found that a very useful tactic for everyday use, to step back and not take things personal, especially if you're given a situation where you personally don't believe in it. But not everybody can get to ad hominem if they don't have the tools. So have you ever found yourself in that moment where you felt conflicted within yourself and with what you had to defend? How did you manage to stay calm, or how can you advise someone to stay calm and not get into that?
Well, what you do is you remember, if we're talking about doing a debate, you remember to separate yourself from it, that this is an exercise, this is an intellectual exercise that you're engaging in. If somehow you find yourself, maybe you're not a lawyer, but you are called upon to be a spokesman for some people who have a problem, and you discover, oh my goodness, not that they're wrong, but they've got this long list of imperfections. Well, how do you do that then? Can you be a spokesperson for people you find reprehensible? Well, maybe you couldn't, and in most instances in the world, you can say no. But what if you recognize the world as a lot less black and white and a lot more gray, and the situation arises where you say, well, these are my people, this is their complaint, this is my my village, my extended family, versus giant corporation that found oil under their land, let's say. Yeah. That kind of thing happens. And you get into the weeds of the people you're representing, and you find, well, some of these people are, they're reprehensible people, but some of them are good people. How do you then present yourself as a spokesperson for this group, even if you think, some of the people there are ill-motivated? Could you do it? That's a hypothetical question. I don't ask you to answer that. Maybe you could do it because deep down, in your heart, these are my people. This is a giant corporation. On balance, it's pretty clear that I belong defending them. They're not perfect. They don't have to be perfect. Some of them I really dislike for very good reason. But these are my people. This is my crowd. This is my culture. This is my fill in the blank.
But then to some degree,
versus a heartless corporation. I've made that a bit easier, haven't I? But you still might find yourself as a spokesperson for people that you'd rather not.
But then, to some degree, then you still have to have, I've noticed one thing, in order to win a case, you got to also believe in that argument, because everything comes to believable. Have you made it believable enough to argue with it? But if you don't agree with that person, you shouldn't take it personal. How do you make something believable? Let's say you're arguing in a in a boardroom meeting, and you have to take that side where you don't really the side you don't really agree, and you have to defend it. And that internal conflict between you goes on, where it's completely against what you believe, and it's giving you kind of like a stress that you have to go do this. But how do you? But on the other hand, this is where your bread and butter is.
Well, you can if you sit down and examine a case, you can find something that you can believe in.
In that whole situation, there's something.
There's something. And when you present your case, you make that the most important factor in deciding it. This was, if I may make a recommendation, it's not plugging my own book, but a very successful novelist who doesn't need my endorsement, but I'll give it anyway. Robert Harris, who wrote the novel Imperium, which is about the young early career of Cicero, who was he was a great lawyer, great advocate, a very successful politician, and in this particular scene in the book, as a lawyer, he's called upon to defend someone, and he agrees because it would be politically advantageous for him to take this case. And he takes the case, he examines the facts, and he says, "Oh, my client is clearly guilty. He was the Roman governor of Gaul. He did pretty much what the Gauls are accusing him of. What can I believe in this case?" And what he decided was, my client is a Roman. He's being accused and attacked in a Roman court by Gauls, who were the traditional enemy of Romans. So let's say it was, an Englishman being accused by Putin's government of some wrongdoing in a British court. So that was the right, of all the rights and wrongs, that was the thing he could defend. And he was successful in defending this case because he said, no Roman, the whole of Gaul isn't worth this one Roman citizen. He's a Roman citizen, damn it, and citizenship meant a great deal to Romans.
So you have to find that one thing you believe in.
You find a thing that you can cling to. As his biographer said, the next day he forgot about it.
He forgot about it?
On to the next thing.
That doesn't really happen in today's world.
Well, yes, in today's world, somebody would remember it and remind him of it. But yes, in Roman times, they didn't have to worry about what popped up on Twitter.
Talking about Twitter and X and all of that, I like the word you said, we're in a hyper telecommunication world. And I was thinking a lot about what your thoughts would be around the birth and the wonderful explosion of AI, artificial intelligence, generative artificial intelligence, because I know we've had predictive intelligence for a while. How does that affect, or what are the concerns you think, and why would we need debating skills even more now with AI introduction?
Well, I have to admit that one's a big problem for me. And in fact, it's part of the same problem in general, from my point of view, part of the same problem as social media generally. Because the problem with social media is people can post things anonymously. They can be vicious, nasty, and then they can disappear. And what the net effect of this has been is that instead of people finding common ground, they just take sides, extreme sides, and hurl abuse at each other. It's almost a logical next step into the abyss to have artificial intelligence which can create something really convincing looking and sounding to deceive people. I mean, that's what you get away from in an in-person debating society, or just an in-person meeting, never mind a debating society, and any kind of in-person meeting. You get away from that kind of fakery and tomfoolery that you could be subject to. You could, I don't know, somebody may yet make up a plausible sounding moving image of me saying things that I would never in a million years say because I don't believe them. And if I had millions of followers who depended on what I said, then, that would be a problem. It would be a problem for me. It would be a problem for them. But that will happen.
So here's my thing. I understand the social media argument to some degree, but then I'm like, is it the media that's the problem, or is it the lack of practice to think things through that we get on to? I know not everybody's got the level of discernment, but if level of discernment elevated globally, but also because, and then there's also the whole culture thing, because every country will see discernment very differently as well. So emotions are running high. Is it the social media, or is it the society that has to do the shifting?
Well, I think the society will, because the social media won't. And for a society to do that kind of shift, it will take a lot of people to work tirelessly and assiduously at it, which is why I'm not optimistic.
Okay, so it's for that reason. And would debating help with this?
I think it would help individuals, because individuals who have practiced live debating would think twice, think 3 times even, when something is presented, and be a bit more skeptical of what is presented, and maybe even moved if they feel strongly enough about whatever the issue is that's come up to investigate a bit further. And I think the practice of participating in these academic debates is would be helpful in that regard, because the worst possible scenario, as I foresee it, is that people don't do that. They just take what they see, and they either will believe it, or, and this is possibly worse, they'll stop believing anything. A Russian friend of mine told me this, because I was watching I think it was a YouTube video of Putin saying the most ludicrous things. Oh, it was his annual international press conference. I said, that's idiotic. And he says, does he expect Russians to believe that? I mean, they're not stupid. I mean, there's stupid people everywhere. But broadly speaking, I don't think they are stupid. Certainly not stupid enough to believe that. And he said, you've missed the point entirely. I said, okay, well, what's the point?
Yeah.
I said, what's the point? Okay. He said, here's the big insight. Get ready to deal with this, Caroll. The point is not to make people believe stupid things, ridiculous things that Putin says. The point is to make people not believe anything anybody says. So that if you say, Putin's lying about this, then the correct response from a defender of Putin is not to say, oh, no, that's true. The correct response is, well, he's a politician, he's a president, he's a politician, they all lie. You can't believe anything any one of them says ever, so come on, move on. And
So then we actually stop investigating.
Well, yeah, just don't believe anything. Nothing's true. Peter Pomerantsev, he was, I forget where he teaches now, but he was with the London School of Economics for a while, and I heard him. He wrote a book called Nothing is True and Everything is Possible.
Okay.
And because that's it. When nothing is true, everything is possible. And, you if you're in the position of a very strong state, a centralized government, then that's actually better. That not so much that you're making your own people believe stupid things, but that you're making people believe that nothing is true. So the thing to do is hunker down and, get on with your life as best you can, because nothing is true. Don't expect anything to be true ever.
Causation or correlation. So social media actually then makes it far easier for anything to be put out there. And the person who's reading it thinks, I am doing something by reading up on it, but I've not questioned it. Yeah. So by not questioning it, and then if you run it through AI, which is known to, whatever we are putting into AI, and whoever is putting whatever is into AI is what we're getting out. So believability is a question mark. You have to now, whatever you get from AI, you need to actually check it again. Mm-hmm. Social media, you have to check it again. And this fact checking is getting harder and harder as well. So how can fact checking still take place in this hyper communication world? Because I know you're saying we're doom gloom. And I know you don't, but even then there's some people who say, well, how do I fact check? How can I make this in a way that I need to question whatever it is? Because for me, I learned to question things because I did debating. Mm-hmm. It made me see other sides and question whatever I'm being dished at. So how can we, in this hypersensitive or hyper telecommunicative world, what can we do other than this?
Well, you can raise this question to yourself. The source of information from which I'm getting this news. Say, do they have an interest in getting things right, or do they not have an interest in getting things right? One of the things I like, for instance, about a broadcaster, say, like the BBC, is people on my right politically say, this is left-wing, namby-pamby, mother state, it's all rubbish, communist, BBC, it's the Bolshevik Broadcasting Corporation is what it stands for. And there are people on my left who say, the BBC, that's the establishment, that's the state, that's that's the higher ups, that's the conservative elite. You don't believe anything they say, and that's not a bad starting place.
Why is the left not a bad starting place, or is you saying both sides are not a bad? Well,
it's good. It's good to have that kind of calumny and hypercriticism from both of those sides.
Okay, got it.
Because when you've got someone saying, well, I read, what is it? I remember stumbling into it. It's an online paper. It's called The Canary. And they had a headline that grabbed my attention, and I went through it, and then I went to their website. I was looking around some of their other things, and I said, "This is very unnuanced. It's really, really blatant, saying everything is a capitalist conspiracy." And a friend of mine pointed out. He said, "It's the left-wing Breitbart." And if you know what Breitbart is, they are. You've heard of Steve Bannon. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he used to run Breitbart, or he used to broadcast for them. In any case,
I don't think my listeners might know.
Yes. So, all right. So you've got the Canary and Breitbart, mm-hmm. And they've got loads of very faithful followers who swallow what they say. And the difference between either of them and something like the BBC is that Breitbart readers will look at the BBC and say, oh, it's the Bolshevik Broadcasting Corporation, it's all this left-wing blah blah blah, and people who read the Canary will say, oh, it's the establishment, it's right-wing, whereas they don't say that about their own favorite publication ever.
Okay.
So it's something as a start. Now that's certainly not the only criterion you should.
But you're
rest
saying
on.
it's about coming to the gray.
But it's a place to start is who attacks this particular medium and on what grounds do
When
they
you
attack
say
it?
who, how do you know? How can somebody know the who? Who, so if it's the right or the left.
Well, you could see what kind of case are people making. So if you're reading it in a social medium like Twitter or Facebook, and this thing pops up, and you can tell sometimes by the vitriol who is supporting it and who is opposing it. Now, having said that, of course, there's the problem that propagandists and spin machines have a staff almost of people to come up with both right wing and left wing attacks. So it's difficult. It's never easy, and we're never absolutely sure. But if you
So I go back to that question.
you go back to the question, how do you know?
How do you know, and when you read whatever you read on social media or even what you get out of AI, it seems to me you still have to question it, but then you are still subjected to going to do more reading. Mm-hmm. And then you're saying, okay, you get these two sides, but then you're projected with all this information. You got to weed it out to get to that gray. At least if you're talking amongst different perspectives.
Well, here again, this is where learning debate helps, because it helps you question it. If you read an article and they are making accusations and they're using inflammatory language, they're making accusations, but they don't say what it is that the person did that they don't like. They don't say specifically what it is. Mm-hmm. They just say, oh, this person is a woke snowflake, blah, 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 without saying he's proposing something that will have these direct consequences, which you can check on here.
Well, it reminds me of this, is that sometimes people think emotions is evidence and evidence is emotion, which is not. So looking at the accusations and looking for the evidence or the reason behind it has to be emotional free, I guess, mm-hmm. is what you're referring to, but it has to have a logical, something I could not argue.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if an article cites information from, let's say, if it's an American source, there's a Bureau of National Statistics. Mm-hmm. God knows if it's been closed down by executive order by now. It's been a week. But there's a Bureau of National Statistics, and one of the things about a somewhat detached civil service is that they can be inured from political, the kind of partisan politicking that would make them non-credible. But one of the things you can do is, and you should do this particularly if it's a field, like the field that you're in, like when I was in finance, and I had to follow treasury statistics, you can follow them and see how consistent they are. And that the problem with all of what I'm saying is it takes time. It takes time, it takes work. But if you are involved in a business where you rely on treasury statistics and you rely on them to be accurate and you follow them and you see where they've been wrong, or you see where they correct themselves because they were wrong, then you can have, I think you can have more confidence in what they're saying.
So you need consistency when you're looking at research, look at consistency, for consistency.
Yes. And if you're talking about, I don't like to say, because it's not a good idea to say always trust the government. But the thing is about a government bureau that has existed for a long time, they have a stake in getting things right. If someone has a stake in getting things right, then you can be at least more assured that they're going to try to get things right rather than just make stuff up. If you're talking about a headline that has no stake in getting things right, that will contradict its last week's headlines today, then, and I don't want to mention any particular tabloid, because I know the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution doesn't apply in the United Kingdom. But if you see a tabloid headline that contradicts itself 2 weeks ago or 6 months ago, you should have great caution in accepting that as a source. Whereas,
that could be also with social media now too.
Oh well, yeah. That would probably be where you see the tabloid headlines, is on your social media feed. But I think that there are government reports that I will trust more than other government reports, or shall we say, reports of other governments, and there are sources that I was going to say I know, but you could always challenge someone on that. Mm-hmm. But I feel reasonably comfortable relying on, because they have more of an interest in getting things right than in selling clicks.
So in a world that we're living in, clicks, AI, lack of sitting through and thinking through if this is consistent, whether the message is consistent. Mm-hmm. So if you get on social media or AI, we have to do actually the opposite. Slow down, look for the patterns, look for the consistency. Yeah, but I think slow down is the key, isn't it?
Yeah, and I don't think social media really like that, because they want to
click.
From what I understand about their business model, they want you to keep with their clicking from their page.
Well, there's also a bit of exhaustion of everybody trying to keep up at the moment.
Oh, absolutely.
So
you also, I mean, now then this is going to devolve into a whole lifestyle.
Yeah. So we're going to go, but I want to come back to it.
How much time do you devote to keeping up with the news, or do you just decide as the Kremlin would like? You just decide, well, nothing is true, so I'm not going to pay attention to anything. Just going to try to get on with my little life.
I was recommended to read a book called Bad Data. Bad Data.
Ooh, wow, yeah. It's a catchy title. It's got me interested.
It's about how actually the way it's been interpreted is questionable, how we use it to our advantage rather than actually sitting and really giving data for what data is. So I have to read up on that and get back on it. But my final thoughts on this is something I've always wanted to ask you. Your top 5 tips. How do you disagree to get to an agreement?
How do you disagree to get to an agreement?
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's start for the moment.
Top 3, maybe.
We'll think for a minute. Informal debate.
Okay.
Informal debate. Remember, you're not trying to get an agreement, because the whole point is, the other side has to defend their case. So You're never going to get agreement from them. But this is a valuable lesson because you learn, I'm not going to reach them. I mean, that's the whole point of this exercise. I'm not going to reach them. It's them. It's the audience. They're the ones I want to persuade. So realize who it is that you do want to persuade and influence, and concentrate on them and presenting to them as reasonably and straightforwardly as you can why you're right and why they're wrong. Now, when you're outside a formal debate, like for instance, if you write advertising, you have this great advantage that there's no other side. It's just you presenting your side and nobody to question it. But if you are presenting, say, let's just say, for example, you have to make a presentation to colleagues. Right? This is something that a lot of people actually have to do in their real lives. If you have to persuade colleagues to support your idea for a project, you reach the colleagues where they are. You start with what you can agree on. Now, in a debate, you do that at the point of when you're defining your terms. You say, all right, we agree that, that red is red and blue is blue and yellow is yellow. Therefore, then you move on to the next point where you're trying to persuade people to agree with your point based on something they already agree with. So let me give a brief, silly example, which will be in tonight's workshop in case you don't make it. But let's say a TV ad comes on, and the guy is holding a bottle of colorful liquid and say, "You're a good parent, right? You want what's best for your children, right? Well, Flemmo has vitamins X, Y, and Z, or A, B, and C would be more appropriate for." Flemmo has vitamins A, B, and C. It's delicious. Give it to your child. And then on a commercial, you can even cut away to someone in a white coat holding a beaker and saying, "As a doctor, I agree. Vitamins A, B, and C are very important for a healthy child." And then, back to the original guy and say, "Buy Flemmo. It's got vitamins A, B, and C, and the doctor says it's good for your child." Now, there's no one on the other side of that. There's no one to argue it. There's no one to say even, does this drink have a lot of sugar? Does it have so many vitamins? Are there other sources? Would fresh fruit be better? Would fresh fruit be cheaper? There's nobody to raise any of those concerns. So in a presentation, you're there to give your side, and then you back it up with, your colleagues then, would reasonably have. I know this is what makes it different from advertising, is then your colleagues would have the equivalent questions of, does it have the right amount of vitamins? Does it have additives or sugar? Are there better ways? Are there better ways to get at what we're trying to get at?
So they should, when you're doing that presentation, always think about the potential questions that are going to be asked.
Exactly.
That you don't want to be asked.
Well, it's not necessarily that you don't want to be asked them, but you do want to be prepared for them.
Okay. Because
in a business meeting, they should be asked. And in a business meeting, you should have the right answer, as opposed to an advert where you're not expecting to be asked challenging questions.
Okay, second tip.
Second tip. Oh, wasn't that 5?
No, that wasn't 5. No, that wasn't 5. That was about taking the other side. The benefits of that.
Okay, that's the benefits of taking the other side.
Remember, it's about disagreeing to agree. Why do we need to disagree to agree?
Why do we? Well, we don't always have to disagree to agree. What we're trying to get at is agreement where there is disagreement or potential.
All right, I'll go with that one.
All right, one of the other things, and this is a presentational thing rather than a logic thing, is one of the things you learn in formal debate is that you don't attack someone who has a different view. You don't attack that person personally.
Yeah, I think that's a big one.
You keep calm You address everyone. It doesn't have to be as formal as in a debating society, like barristers in a court, where you have to call the judge Milud and you have to refer to the other person as, or if you ever watch Parliament, when the Prime Minister is referring to someone on the other benches, he says, "Well, the right honourable gentleman," or the honourable gentleman. And when he's talking about his own side, he says, "My honourable friend." But you never personalize it, and that's you don't have to be as stiff and formal as a barrister or a prime minister, but it's good to maintain courtesy.
I was just going to say, isn't that a third tip?
To be polite.
Is it not a third tip then would be, well, courtesy or polite would be respectfulness?
Yes.
In a summation.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And conducting it throughout. Even if you're saying that the other side is wrong, you can say it politely. You don't have to be like some idiot on Twitter saying that the deputy prime minister has a history of child abuse or whatever idiotic thing a famous person said about the deputy prime minister.
I always have to say, whenever you go on, you're standing up and you're giving us, you're showing us how to debate. You have like this perfect poker face sometimes. It speaks volumes, your face. So does body language and tone of voice. Because I know when I go up, my heart's beating, my voice is trembling all of a sudden, and I'm like, oh, I have to voice an opinion here. And especially when I have to disagree.
If your heart is beating, that's a good sign.
Oh, really?
Even if it's beating a little bit fast, that's a good sign. But, if you're talking about your breathing, there are things you can do. You're just controlling your breath is actually one of the things you can do in debate or in a tense meeting, departmental meeting. Controlling your breath is controlling your nerves, and you can take a deep breath without exaggerating it, so the people don't know you're taking a deep breath to deal with your nerves. But you can take a deep breath, and one of the things about holding a deep breath for a few moments is you look thoughtful. Even if you're panicking inside, you look thoughtful. Ideally, you'll be arranging your thoughts. But even if you're feeling very nervous, if you slowly take a breath and you hold it for a moment and you do this, you look thoughtful, and that's nuance. That's something that doesn't come across on comments on social media. But in person, you look thoughtful. You might even raise a little bit of anticipation among your listeners as what is she going to say? But that breath helps you control your nerves.
Okay.
And you let it out slowly and then make your point. So you should be thinking of a point, by the way.
No, this is a good fourth point. I think it's a very valuable point. So the final fifth one, I want it to be a tip on something that I have not read in a book. That is a typical Paul tip.
Well, I don't know what you've read.
Well, you've thrown a lot of books at us and say, come on, read this book. But a tip that is super useful in the moment, in the fly, when you're in that discomfort, having to speak your mind, other than breathing, other than not giving it personal, other than taking the other perspective. Mentioned all four. One more that you think is super useful. Think that we're in a diverse world. I always go back to this one. When you were in your career, you told me you had been in Japan, and they kept nodding and agreeing with you, but actually they had a whole different...
They kept nodding, and I thought, they at first when they kept nodding, I thought, right, it's I'm getting across it, sinking in, and then in just a little Q&A back, they hadn't quite. I mean, they had got a lot of it. I mean, this wasn't a beginning course in finance, but they hadn't quite grasped my point. But I thought they had, because they were nodding along with me, and I learned that they were nodding along to be polite.
So what would be a very because that can happen also when people are disagreeing. They just don't want to argue. They don't want to speak their mind. What's a very tip there for people to actually bring that conversation forward?
Well, you can. I was going to say oversimplify, but just simplify to the right level, because what I did on that occasion is there were half a dozen of us in a conference room, and I said, look, we're here, we're away from everybody else. This is a time for you to ask questions, to learn. You're here to learn what you don't know, right? And of course, they all nodded. I said, no, not just politely, but you're here to learn. I mean, that's why your boss has sent you here, right? And, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Right, you're here to learn what you don't know. Help me understand where you need to learn something new, where something isn't coming across. How do we get from the point where you don't know what I know to you do know what I know? And to do that, as your teacher, I'm asking you to speak up and say, I'm not quite getting that. Please go over that again. I don't mind doing that. I'm paid to do that, in fact, but it will be helpful only if I know the area that you don't know, so that we can go and explore it and discuss it. And it took a while, but I was there teaching for 3 days, so it took a while, but they did. And I said, remember, we're away from our colleagues, or we're away from our immediate colleagues. We're here to learn stuff we don't know, and I need to know what it is that you don't know. So help me with that. And when I asked them to help me with that, and when they saw it from that perspective, they were certainly more willing. It seemed to me, anyway. We got along better. They said, "Oh no, Mr. Carroll." It was very formal. No, Mr. Carroll. No, this is what I was thinking. I said, "All right, here we can break this down now and get this point across. Remember, you need to know this stuff when you leave this room. So it's okay if you don't know it here, but it's not okay if you don't know it out there." We're agreed on that, and they all agreed on that. So
it's a bit like help me help you.
Yeah, it is, but
it's pretty useful.
Help me help you. Yes, it is. That's a good, if glib way to put it.
Paul, thank you so much for today.
My pleasure.
I hope you didn't mind me picking your brain, because I always do like to pick your brain.
It's pretty slim pickings, but it's good to have it fluffed up.
All right. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
And that's a wrap. What did you think of this week's episode? For me, this skill has been such a game changer and such an empowerment to my voice. Even now, as I'm getting more and more confident speaking to all of you through podcasts and sharing my point of view, some of these skills come in pretty handy. But I'd like to know, what are your thoughts around disagreeing thoughtfully in this day and age? Could these tools help you too? And if you want additional resources, make sure you join my newsletter. More than anything, if you like this episode and you find it going to help somebody out there, do follow and share. Who knows what that might change for someone else's world. Until the next one, take care.